right, great to see you. If you have a copy of the scriptures, go to the book of Exodus, the Old Testament book of Exodus, chapter 3. It's on the left side. You can use your phone, your iPad, or if you have a copy of the scriptures, that would be great. And one of the values that you'll see at First Alliance, we see it in worship and in preaching, and not just here, but all throughout all ministries, is how to reach as many people as possible without sacrificing biblical muscle. And so that's a value of my own life, and it's a value of our church, is how to reach as many people as possible without sacrificing biblical muscle. And so if you come on Sunday, no matter who's preaching, you know a little bit more how to read the Bible for yourself all throughout the week, because we want to get God's word in us, because that's how we experience God, and that's how we connect with God. And in the book of Exodus, some selected passages in the book of Exodus, we're looking at God's work in the life of Moses and the nation of Israel in this series called Having a Soft Heart in a Hard World. How do we respond to God in a way that fulfills his purposes in some circumstances that are unbelievably difficult? Now, we'll be in this series for all the way up to Easter, but next week, let me give you a preview of what's next week. John and Joanna Stumbo will be here with us, and this is significant. John is the president of our denomination, and normally a church is blessed with John, but to have John and Joanna, it is a great gift to us. So John is a very good leader. He's passionate about God's work in the world, but also he is somebody who has trusted God and continued to believe God when life has not always been easy. If you know John's story, about 10 to 12 years ago, he had some physical condition to where we almost lost John, to where his body was ravaged with just a very, very difficult disease at the time. And that's part of his story. But he will be here next week, all three services. This would be a great service to invite somebody to. And John and Joanna, as you're comfortable, would love to meet you after the service if you'd like to do that. But that's next week. But let's get into this week's classic passage on Moses as we continue a series of having a soft heart in a hard world. Let me pray, and then we'll get into the text. So Jesus, we come in wanting to be taught by you, and we need to be taught the grandness and the greatness of who you are in the world that you've called us to live in. You are a trustworthy leader, Jesus, and we want to be trustworthy. We want to be found faithful. You're so patient, but life that is truly life is found in you. So open our ears, open our eyes to see the great things that are in your word and how we may truly live. And the church said together, amen. Well, it is very clear that this is a very difficult time, a hard time to live in. And I'm not just talking about the ice that we experienced this past week. Now, this is difficult days. No matter if you're 8 or 80, I think all of us realize these are some unprecedented circumstances. But in hard times, Christians are called to have soft hearts, because that's what God uses in this world. And so the question that we're asking is, how can we mirror the heart of God in these difficult times? How can we reflect his heart to the world? Now, the need for this is great, because the need to mirror the soft heart of God is great, as I said, because the very character of the world that we live in is at stake. Our hearts are reflected in our lives, and our lives rub off on other people's lives. And we see this. A classic hard heart in the book of Exodus, someone that does not respond to God, who's hardened towards God, is Pharaoh. And all throughout the book of Exodus that we see, because of his life, there is oppression and slavery in the lives of others. But a soft heart towards God is Moses. And Moses, as he responds to God, his life results in, for others, there's freedom, there's a rescuing, there's a sense of fulfilling God's purposes in his life and in others. Now, today we're going to look at two critical questions and one truth to believe. And the reason we're going to look at these two critical questions and one truth to believe is this question: what if God were to ask you to do something great? And it's something that you would have never expected and never dreamed of. How would you respond? And what process would your heart go through? Now, you might be sitting and thinking, okay, this message is for somebody else, because, Paul, if you knew me, my background and my failures and missteps, God would never ask me to do something great. Oh, really? Because I think that's why God gives us the story of Moses, because his background and his upbringings And his track record is not that of what you would expect for somebody who God used greatly. You see, the life of Moses starts off in a way that isn't normal, and the rest of his life isn't normal. He doesn't grow up in kind of a classic family. In fact, he grows up as an orphan. We see that in chapter 2. We'll be in chapter 3, but in chapter 2, to his mother, to save his life, puts him in a basket and floats him down the Nile, which is filled with crocodiles, hoping that Pharaoh's daughter sees him, and she does. This word basket is where we eventually get the word ark. And we see once again that, like Noah's Ark, that God is rescuing humanity again, but this time he's doing it in the life of Moses. Moses means to be drawn out of, that God drew Moses out of the Nile, that he had God's hand on Moses, drawing him out to fulfill special purposes in this world. Now we see that Moses, because he's drawn out of the Nile, he grows up in Pharaoh's household, and he grows up with the best education that the culture could give him at the time, but he knows that he's different. Scholars believe that he has this sense of destiny on him, that he knows he has a sense of destiny about him, because really everybody who's like him, male and of a certain ethnicity, they're all gone. He remains. And so the sense of destiny shows itself one day when he sees an Israelite being beaten by an Egyptian slave master. He takes matters into his own hands. All of a sudden, he's going to kind of fulfill this leadership destiny, kills the Egyptian slave master, and it says he looks to his right, he looks to his left. We see very early on he doesn't look up, and God will need to change that. He kills this Egyptian slave master and hides the body in the sand. The body gets discovered. Note, hiding anything, never good. It strikes fear in his heart. Pharaoh thinks that the coup is starting. Moses will lead it. Moses has to run for his own life. He needs to get out of Dodge. So he runs to this place called Midian. Now, we need to understand where Midian is. There's Egypt in the upper right. Midian is the lower left. This is not Moses going from like Lexington to Frankfurt. This is Moses going to the last known place on the planet back then. It's basically like the moon. No, you didn't want to live in Midian. He runs and runs. And in Exodus chapter 2, verse 15, it says this: when Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and lived in Midian, where he sat down by a well. And I'm sure he did some thinking. What have I done? And what will become of my life? I've blown it. And the questions and the questions and the questions. But little do we know that at this moment, when he stops running, God starts speaking, and God starts developing him into the person, exactly the right person that God will use. You see, he's the exact person, and the process has started because he knows the Egyptian culture. And now from Midian, he's going to become a shepherd. He's going to know that desert. He will become comfortable in the desert. He'll become comfortable leading these people. They don't know this land, but he will. Have you ever wondered, God, why? Why this? Why here? Why that? But all of a sudden, Moses' life will become clear, and all of a sudden, oh, that's why. You see, this desert experience, and desert back then means to speak that which speaks, and this is where God speaks in the desert experiences. This is a time of purification, unlearning what he needs to unlearn, and a time of preparation, of preparing Moses to fulfill his destiny and his calling on his life. Now, his life doesn't make sense. I mean, look at this kind of track record that he has. He goes from orphan to prince, from prince to criminal, criminal to refugee, refugee to ranch hand. How's that for vocational gymnastics? He's like the first millennial. Every 2 years, he switches job. So that's what they say. But he ends up as a shepherd. A shepherd. Now, a shepherd, you need to understand, for Egyptians, a shepherd is the lowest of the low. And back in the book of Genesis, they say, Joseph says to his brothers, to protect them. Tell the Egyptians, tell Pharaoh that you are shepherds, because the Egyptians wouldn't even intermingle with shepherds. That's where he's gone. He's gone from Pharaoh's household to here. And it's here that this is where God speaks. This is where God says, I'm going to call and use you. Now, you might be here this morning. We all look good. We all are Sunday best. But on the inside, or you may be thinking, you know what, God, you couldn't use me. And I'm not in a position. Well, Moses teaches us otherwise. You see, look at Exodus chapter 3. It says this: Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. He led the flocks on the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, which means the mountain of God. Now Horeb didn't always mean mountain of God. Horeb means horrible. It was a wasteland. But this is where God meets Moses, and meeting God can turn any wasteland, any experience, into a holy land. The angel of the Lord appeared to him in the flames of fire from within a bush. And Moses saw though the bush was on fire, and it did not burn up. So this fire doesn't need any fuel to burn. That's significant. I'll come back to it later. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight and why the bush does not burn up. Now, we know that go over does not mean just kind of shift a little bit. He distinctively has to go out of his way. It's like on the other canyon. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, the Lord called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. Oh, let's change it. Moses, Moses. That's appropriate. Moses, Moses. And then Moses said, Here I am. Don't come any closer. God said, Take off your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham and Isaac, and the God of Jacob. Moses would have known this. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. And then the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. That is a classic verse to hold on to if you feel forgotten by God. I've seen it, but now I'm ready to act. Time has come. You are prepared. If I would have acted before, it wouldn't have gone well. Everything is in place. I've not forgotten you. I've heard the cry of them because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their sufferings. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. Oh man, those are always hard. And now the cry of the Israelites have reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians have oppressed them. He sees, he hears, he knows intimately. Now he's ready to act. So now go, I am sending you to bring my people out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, yes, whoopee. Is that what he says? No, who am I? Look at where his focus is. God speaks. God's going to move. And Moses is totally self-consumed. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And that's the promise. This will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you brought the people out of Egypt, you are to worship God on this mountain. And then Moses said to God, suppose the Israelites say to them, your God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is your name? Then what shall I tell them? Then God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Now there's a lot there. But the critical aspect of this text, Exodus chapter 3, is when God comes and says, I'm ready to do something great. I'm going to do something great. And I'm going to use you. And Moses' response is the very first question that we're going to focus on is this. Who am I? Who am I? He doesn't even respond to what God's going to do. He doesn't ask, now, how are you going to do this? He totally focuses on himself. And we know that Moses is unbelievably, he feels insecure to this task. He sees himself as a failure. In fact, in one point, over and over again, he sees himself as faltering of speech, something that I'm unbelievably glad is in the text. He doesn't see himself as eloquent. He doesn't see him over and over up to the task. John Ortberg put it like this: God's sense of timing seems strange to Moses. 40 years ago, maybe. 40 years ago, when he was young, strong, and productive, and in this greatest education civilization could produce, but now he was a nobody, an anonymous shepherd in the forgotten desert, rejected by his own people and a fugitive from the Egyptians. And God says, who am I? And I love God's response. God does not say, Moses, you're a leader. You've got gifts. They have yet to be discovered. You are talented and you are of a good speech. You just need the right situation. God doesn't do any of that. God says, yeah, you're right. You are right. You're the last person anybody thought would lead this. And Moses, that's the point. Because when this happens, they're not going to worship you. They're going to worship me. And that's the point. You see, one of the things we need to realize is that in life, we often say, God, this is who I am. We've got good self-understanding of our gifts and abilities, our sweet spot and our comfort zone. And God says, but this is where I'm calling you to. And there's this great gap, and in that great gap is all the what ifs and what abouts and the emotions of fear and the fear of failure. And God says, get comfortable with that gap, because that's the God gap. That's in everyone's life and in every church. And that gap that you feel, that's my gap. And when I fill in that gap with what I can do, the world takes notice. But have you noticed we'd like to fill that gap and shrink that gap? And God says, no, I've called you to live with a God gap. That's my gap. And that's where I work. You see, the Apostle Paul says, he put it in the New Testament, he says, we have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from whom? God, and not from us. One of the things to get comfortable with is that God will call you to assignments that are way out of your comfort zone. He just does that. Why? Because he wants you to see him work in you. And we're not called to just do the possible. We're called to believe God that he can do the impossible, and we long for that. But often we say, God, who am I? And God says, my presence will go with you. And God grants us his presence for mission. And it's that presence that he grants us for mission is where we experience him. And that's the difference maker in the world. One of the things to remember is that God uses ordinary people in ordinary circumstances to accomplish his extraordinary plan. And so to you who feel ordinary, thank goodness, my fellow ordinarians, because that's who God uses to accomplish his extraordinary plan in the world. Who am I, God says, or Moses says. Who am I? And God says, I will be with you. I'll be with you. Now, Moses, through a series of events, and we'll look at also this as this ongoing dialogue in a couple weeks, through a series of events, says, okay, just suppose that I do this, that I go back to Pharaoh. And just suppose that I have an opportunity to talk to him in the nation of Israel. Who are you? See, the first question is, who am I? And the second question we'll need to answer is, God, who are you? You see, and what's your name? And this is the way the Egyptians thought, that all the gods back then had a name, and their name was attributed to what they would do. And God says, I'm not in those categories. I'm above those categories. You have to think of me differently. I am, meaning I am self-existent. I am above all things. I'm the source of all things. I'm the ending of all things. You cannot contain me in these categories. I'm above all of them. Eugene Peterson puts it well. We cannot make an object of God. God is not a thing to be named. We cannot turn God into an idea. God is not a concept to be discussed. We cannot use God for our own making or doing. God is not a power to be harnessed. We have a long history of wanting to make God into our image and to use him for our purposes. The Egyptian gods, they would pray to them to accomplish something. And God says, I'm not like that. I'm not a means to an end. I'm the source of all things. And I am governing and guiding all of human history, and I've chosen to move and to rescue. Well, Moses experiences God in this burning bush. And I think that's something critical. He's a flame. It's a bush that does not burn. It's a flame that doesn't need any fuel to burn. And I think this is where God says, this is a way to properly begin to think about me. When I lived out west for 20 years, it was in Idaho, and it was a dry heat, they said. Yes, it's 102 degrees, but it's a dry heat. I'm like, well, so is a blowtorch for that matter, but it's really hot out there. And one of the things that we would have campfires, and some of my favorite memories were around a campfire. Out west, we'd go to the top of the Waha Mountains. When we were camping, we'd build a campfire, and some of the best conversations around that fires that kept us warm. We would look at the stars. I remember that. They are vivid in my mind. We enjoyed fire, but we had tremendous respect for fire. I remember our town for 2.5 weeks shut down. We did not leave, not because of ice on the roads, but because smoke in the air. Thousands of acres to the east of us, hundreds of homes were burned. Thousands of acres to the west of us, hundreds of homes were burned. I remember walking into the church one time, the whole sanctuary was filled with smoke. You had this tremendous reverence that you did not deal with fire in an irresponsible and irreverent way. And God is saying, I'm a God to be enjoyed. I'm the source of all things, but I am to be revered and reverenced also. This bush does not burn. God is also a God that doesn't need anything. It doesn't need a fuel. It's a self-contained fuel. It will not burn out. He's self-existent. He doesn't need anything. And God is saying to Moses, who I am, I'm going to place inside you, and you will not need anything to keep burning. I'll burn in you. And no challenge outside of you is going to be greater than the flame in you, and that's going to be me. Why is this significant? Alexander the Great, when he was 20 years old, young 20 years of age, cried and wept because there were no more worlds to conquer. You see, with this, in each one of us, there's a fuel that causes us to burn. Maybe it's family life. Maybe it's the acquisition. Maybe it's climbing the corporate ladder. Maybe it's the ideal relationship. There's some sort of fuel that's causing you to burn. And once that fuel goes out, often you'll go out. Depression sets in. Wondering, now what? And God is saying, I'm going to be the fuel in you, and you will never go out because I'm in you, Moses. My presence will be in you, and you can face any challenge. God says to Moses, take off your sandals. And we often say, take, because this is holy ground. But one of the things I was in that gave kind of clarity to this is I took an Old Testament class in undergrad under a gentleman named Joe Sprinkle, and he knew the Old Testament so well. I mean, it was like he was there. He witnessed it all. I mean, it was just phenomenal. And I remember he said the key to understanding the sandals in chapter 3 is what Moses names his child in chapter 2. He names his child Gershom, which means I'm an alien in a foreign land. You see, Moses didn't feel at home in chapter in chapter 1, or when he didn't feel at home in Egypt. He goes to Midian. He says, I'm not at home here either. I'm a foreigner here. And we have this sense that all throughout Moses' life, he is longing for what's my identity? Where is my security? Where is my sense of home? Where is my sense of people? But Sprinkle went on to say that whenever somebody in that culture was asked to take off their sandals, it was an invitation from somebody to welcome them home. It was an invitation to welcome them into their place. And God is saying, in taking off your sandals, Moses, your heart has been longing for home. It's been longing for identity, for security, and it's not in Egypt. It's not in Midian. It's found in me. The security that you long for as you go on this journey, Moses, will always be in me and my presence. This is Helen Witten. She was born Helen Perry. Her friends just called her Helen. I called her Nana. This is my grandmother. She passed away many years ago. She was great. She's a classic grandmother. She was born in Wayne County, West Virginia. She was raised in Huntington, married when she was 16, 59 years that she was married to Homer. He wasn't a Christian when they got married, but she prayed for many years, and he eventually gave his heart to Jesus. I mean, she was so sweet. I truly believe she had the spiritual gift of gravy making. I mean, she could make gravy out of anything. And I mean, and all of a sudden, there wasn't much of it. You turn your back. Now there's lots of it. How did that happen? And who's ready for that gift to come back, gentlemen? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, phenomenal. She was she was just classic. And she prayed for me. And I remember when she met my wife, Heather, for the first time, just welcomed her into the family. She lived until she was 93. And near the end of her life, in a understandable, healthy way, she began to forget things. You know, this happens. People who study aging say the mind has selective memory at this time, late into the 90s. I remember this one time when I walked into, it was just her and I walked into the room, and she gave me that great smile as you see here. She goes, "Oh, it's my favorite grandson, Steve. It's so nice to see you." I said, I'll take it. So that's fine. And, but I remember I said, "Nana, what do you spend the majority of your time thinking about?" And she said, and she kind of zoned in. She said, "I'm ready to go home. I'm ready to be with Jesus." Now, Helen forgot a number of things, but she never forgot the important thing. That this world, the way it is not our home. Our hearts were created for home, and our hearts will only be truly home when they're with Jesus. And if there is this sense of this world is hard and consistently discontented after you buy this and accomplish this and searching for this, Christian, this world, the way it is not our home. Our home, our hearts will always rest and finally find its contentment in the presence of God when it's with Jesus. One of my favorite passages in the New Testament, just real quick, is when the Apostle John gets to see a vision of this New Jerusalem. And the New Jerusalem is made out of all of these stones. I won't read them all. It's in Revelation chapter 21. Sapphires and emeralds and quartz, and I'll just butcher them, so I won't mention, but there they are. But it says that there's 12 of them. And those 12 stones, which is the city of God, which we dwell in, and we're called his bride at that time, those 12 stones are the exact 12 stones that the Old Testament priest wore on his garments that God said, wear them over your chest, because these 12 stones represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And he says, those 12 stones, I want them always to communicate to the 12 tribes of Israel, I carry you close to my heart. Take that Old Testament, take that New Testament. God is saying when we're home together, you need to know I will carry you close to my heart. And your heart will be home as it knows my heart for all of eternity. And I say, wow. You see, one of the ways to live effective here is never to forget that we were created for then and there. And as you long and live for then and there, it allows us to be effective here. You know the song, Turn Your Eyes on Jesus, and the things of this world become strangely what? Dim in the light of his glorious face. So take off your sandals. God is still rescuing. Take off your sandals. God is inviting you home. Take off your sandals. God is still rescuing. God is still redeeming. Take off your sandals. God is still calling people out of retirement into his work. Take off your sandals. God is still tapping on the shoulders those who believe they are out of the game and could never be used. Take off your sandals because God is wanting you to live with a good God gap that he can fill. And when he fills it, the onlooking world will say, there is a rescuer, and his name is Jesus, and I want to know him. Let's be that church. Let's pray. Dear Jesus, all of us have a self-talk and a self-doubt. We so quickly put our eyes on ourselves. This text has us put our eyes on you. That we go forward in this life with our eyes on you. And we ask the question, why not us? Why not me? Because I go forward by faith in what you can do. Use me, Jesus. Use me, Jesus. And the church said together,